Thank you. So I am Salongo, for those of you who want to know my name. I'm here and I have the privilege to introduce Father Emmanuel Katongole. So many of us encountered him at Bethany House in Uganda, where we stay with him when he's there, and if he's not, he still hosts us and provides us with hospitality. So thank you to Father Emmanuel for that. And it is a refuge for us when we are in Uganda. So it's meant to be that. The Bethany House, which he created, is essentially a house of peace and reconciliation and conversation, correct? So thank you for offering that to us. Emmanuel comes to us, he actually comes back home. He was here in 1999 to 2000, I believe, as a visiting professor. And so welcome back home, Father Emmanuel. It's nice to have you here. And he's now at the University of Notre Dame and teaching in theology as well as peace studies. So he has a dual appointment. And according to his own records, he is a pilgrim born in Rwanda, okay, and raised in Uganda. So he has a wonderful book that talks about the church in Africa from both those perspectives. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you really should. And behind that is some of his latest publications on lament and reconciliation. He is a theologian who believes that you really can't do theology without tears, without really pouring over the suffering and the pain of your own life and the lives of those around you with whom you are in solidarity. And he works internationally with all kinds of religious communities, evangelicals, Methodists, Presbyterians. He's taught at Duke, Notre Dame, Scranton, and graduated from Louvain as well. So he has wonderful international experience. And we're blessed to have him here with us today. Also, you should know he has purchased land of late and started the Bethany Land Institute, 75 acres, is it? 85 acres of land where they're going to be doing sustainable farming, organic farming, teaching a local community, and having educational resources around that. So it's something that we really hope we can get more involved in with Father Emmanuel's work in Uganda. So, well, I won't say too much more. I will just welcome him back home again and thank him for his time. So, thank you, Father. One thing to say, to remind you that we do have his book for $5 if you'd like to purchase it. So don't go away without one if you can get a hold of it. Okay. So, thank you again.
Thank you very much, Cyrus, for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. How nice and how good to be back home. I am home here in Scranton, 1999 and 2000. Newly graduated from Louvain, and they got an opportunity through Professor Pinches and the Theology Department of Religious Studies here to spend a year of teaching here at the University of Scranton. It is actually to Scranton that I owe a deep debt of gratitude that I now count myself as a professor of theology and international peace studies. My background is in philosophy. My graduate Ph.D. work is in philosophy. So it is at Scranton that I became a theologian, because they invited me to teach theology, and that was the first time for me to teach theology. So coming back home to Scranton has very beautiful, sweet memories, but also it is with a debt of gratitude. And in a special way also, I want to congratulate Charlie Pinches and your team for these many years of connection through this program. What you have realized is simply amazing. The summit, I think, is just an expression of that, and that through the summit you want to explore ways in which to go even deeper is amazing. So I just want to congratulate you, and how wonderful to be back, to be here, but to hear all the wonderful experience and the stories that you and your students here have had over these years in Uganda, and the impact that you continue to have, and the conversations that you continue to have. So it's just an amazing program, and I hope it even continues to grow. But one of the things that struck me as Jane was presenting was the amazing story of Dr. Scott, who, is it 15, 16, 17 years ago, relocated to this remote part of Uganda, and now see what has happened. It's just amazing. Just chatting to him after the last session, he said he can't even believe what has happened. If you ask him, he wouldn't have, in all possibility, have guessed that his life would turn out the way it has turned out and impacted so many people in the way that it has impacted them. So that kind of surprise, in a way, that sense of there's something bigger than any of our own ideas can explicitly name that is going on. Something beyond each one of us that is going on. That God is doing something bigger in the world, bigger than any one person, bigger than any one institution. I think that is what is at stake in these kind of discussions and programs that we're thinking about, and how to connect to that, to the story of God in the world. And so as I was thinking about this, I said, well, one way that we can start this conversation this evening is to capture a story in a way that is similar, not only to Scott's story, but to, I think, a story that is similar that many of us will perhaps connect to. But it's a story of being unhinged. Because I think what this program is trying to do is to unhinge students and faculty here, but in a way that locates them within a bigger process of what is going on in the world, of what God is doing. And that cannot happen without being unhinged. And so I thought we start with a story like that, so that we can talk a little bit more about what this might mean. And the story that I want to begin with is to share with you is a story that many of you might know. Is the story of Millard Fuller, the founder of Habitat for Humanity. As we know, the story of Habitat for Humanity is just been impressive around the world, a bit over 3 million houses around the world. But there is no Habitat for Humanity without somebody like Millard Fuller. And I think there's something like that is going on, and these kind of programs that we're thinking about, in a way, speak to a similar dynamic of being unhinged as Millard Fuller was. So let's begin with a bit of that story, and then we can have a conversation. This is a little bit long. It's 10 minutes of that, but I think it's something that will provide a good context for a bit of discussion. At any rate, you can watch the video as you continue to enjoy a bit of coffee and cookies as well.
I started off early in life, being raised up in East Alabama, with a great desire to be a success in life, and I equated success with making a lot of money. And when I went to Auburn University, and then after getting my basic degree there, I went to law school at the University of Alabama and met a fellow student on my first week in law school, and he had this fellow student I met had the same desire that I did to be a big success in life, and so we sat up until about 2 o'clock in the morning. We met each other about 7 o'clock at night, we set up till 2 o'clock in the morning and decided to be law partners and business partners. And we established a mission statement. And our enterprise was only a few hours old. But we decided we wanted a mission statement, and it was simple, easy to remember. Our mission statement was simply to get rich. That was our mission statement. And for the next 8 years, we devoted every waking hour to getting rich. And we sold all kind of products, and I won't have time to tell you the details. But even when I was a student, we were making $50,000 a year as students in our various business ventures. And then we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and continued our business ventures, had a law practice. We only practiced law for about 2 years because the business was growing so fast we didn't have time to practice law. And so we closed up our law business and pursued this direct mail publishing business. And it was phenomenally successful. We sold tractor cushions. We sold 20 train carloads of tractor cushions in 1 3-month period, made enough money to buy a building. Then we got into publishing cookbooks, became the largest publisher of cookbooks in the United States, selling them by the millions. Then we sold all kinds of other products and got all of the things that money will get for you. In the meantime, while I was a senior still at law school, I married Linda. And we moved to the capital city of Alabama. I ensconced her in a beautiful house, got a Lincoln Continental Drive, cabin on the lake, 2 speedboats, 10 horses, 2,000 acres of land, servants. As we say in the South, we were wading in high cotton. But she had everything but no husband because I worked all the time. And sometimes I would even sleep at the office. I'd come home and eat, go back and work, lay on the sofa and sleep a few hours, get up and work because I was in a headlong rush to get rich. And even when my treasurer came in and told me I was worth $1 million, I said, okay, let's go for 10 now. And that was the way my life was at that point. At that time I was keeping a diary and I would make entries and I calculated how much I was making per minute. I was keeping a run rate. I'm making so much a minute now and then I want to make more per minute. But I paid a price for that because my wife and I, even though as a very young woman, she had everything from a material standpoint, but she didn't have a husband. And the inevitable happened. We drifted apart. She ended up leaving me, going to New York City. Our marriage hung in the balance. And finally she agreed to see me, but she wanted to wait a while. And we had a man in our company who was a pilot, and I rented an airplane, and I told this guy, and of course he didn't know, nobody in the company knew about the personal crisis I was going through, but I told him, I said, let's go to Niagara Falls. And he said, what do you want to go there for? I said, I've just never been, I'd like to go see it. So he said, okay, it's your money. And so we took off for Niagara Falls. And as we were coming into Niagara Falls, we almost crashed into a commercial airliner. That was a sobering thing. But we landed and went over on the Canadian side and got a hotel room, and we were watching television. And there was a program on about a young woman who had gone to China as a missionary. And she met a young officer in the Chinese army. And they fell in love with each other. And they were contemplating getting married. But this officer realized if he married an American Christian missionary woman, that would end his career in the Chinese army. And he went to the old village leader and he said, I got a problem. I'm a career officer in the Chinese army. My career is very important to me, but I've met this wonderful young woman that I'm in love with and I want to marry her, but I know if I married her, it's going to be the end of my career in the Chinese army. What should I do? And as the camera zeroed in on this old village leader's face, he said these words, a planned life can only be endured. And they just jumped out of the screen at me because at that point in my life, it was planned. And my plan was to get richer and richer and richer and richer and be buried in the rich part of the Montgomery, Alabama cemetery. That was my planned life. And I got to thinking that, maybe, and of course, as I said, we had become the largest publisher of cookbooks in the world. We were selling cookbooks by the millions. And having been raised up in a Christian home, I had the Bible and all of that teaching in my makeup. And I got to thinking to myself, you know, no matter what I do in life, one day it's going to come to an end. It's like the life of all of us comes to an end. Life on this earth doesn't last forever. In fact, it's pretty short. But I thought one day I'm going to stand before the God who created me, and he's going to say, what did you do with the gift of life I gave you? And I could hear myself say, Lord, I sold a hell of a lot of cookbooks. And I wondered how impressed he would be. And I really began to think, if I could report to the Lord who created me that one day I was out in a poor neighborhood, in a rural area, and I found a family that didn't have an outhouse. And I built them an outhouse. And I thought that might be a report that would be more impressive to the God who had created me. So Linda agreed finally to see me, and I went to New York with all of this swirling in my head. And fortunately, we were reconciled. A lot of confession on both sides, a lot of tears, a lot of very emotional turmoil. But the end result of all of it was a decision on the part of us to fundamentally and drastically change and get off the path of the planned life that we had. And we decided to extend our spiritual antenna and pick up God's message for us and see maybe what was the right path for us from God's point of view. And we felt very strongly that in order to do what we felt we should do, that in our situation, we should divest ourselves of our wealth. And so we decided to sell the company and to give every penny of it away. And to get rid of our 2,000 acres of land and our horses and our cattle and our speedboats and give it all away. And of course, when we went back home and told family and friends what we decided, they all thought we'd had a mental breakdown. Even the pastor who had counseled with us thought we were nuts. And I said, Pastor, but don't you know the Bible? It says it's difficult for the rich to get into the kingdom. And, you know, and he said, yeah, but you got to be practical. He didn't believe his own message. But I said, I think in our situation, this is what God wants us to do. And we were led to a small Christian community near Americus, Georgia, Cornelia Farm, and met Clarence Jordan, a man I'd never heard of in my life. And he became our spiritual mentor. He ended up being the person closest to Jesus of anyone I had ever known. And he had a profound impact on our thinking. And the consequence of that is a ministry emerged out of this change in our lives. A ministry emerged out of it which initially involved the building of one house for one family, the Johnson family, near Americus, Georgia. And then after working almost 5 years there in that rural, obscure corner of southwest Georgia, we became missionaries in Africa, and we worked for 3 years in what was Zaire at that time, the old Belgian Congo. Today it's called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we built 114 houses in the capital city of Bandaka, and then we went to the southern part of the region and started 300 more houses, and came back to Americus, Georgia, and back to Cornelia in 1976. And sitting on the floor of an old abandoned chicken barn, we had the first meeting of Habitat for Humanity. And over the years, people have asked me, Miller, when you started Habitat for Humanity, did you ever think it was going to become the huge organization that it has become? I got out the old minutes that we had. We wrote handwritten minutes on that, in that first meeting where we were sitting on the floor of the chicken barn. You know what we wrote in the minutes of that first meeting? Our first goal is to build housing for 1 million people. And we were just a tiny little group of people sitting around on the floor. And that goal was achieved in August of 2005.
Impressive. A planned life can only be endured. Planned life can only be endured. What we wanted is to get off our planned life, he says. What we wanted is to extend our spiritual antenna so that we can pick up the messages that God had for us. I think that is exactly what this is all about. Extend our antenna so that we can pick the messages that God intends for us. So I thought briefly what I would do this afternoon is to invite you into a kind of thought experiment, especially since many of you have been to Uganda through this program. So perhaps this doesn't apply to you, but perhaps you have friends, people who feel interested enough. They feel this is exciting when they receive an invitation. Come, let's go on something like this, 2 weeks. But it seems to be not possible. They feel interested, excited, but there are so many reasons why they cannot go at this time. The time is not right. I'm just in the middle of my school year, sophomore year. I wish we were maybe towards the beginning or the end of my year, maybe I could come. The time is not right. Or I just got my boyfriend or my girlfriend, now I can't leave them. This is going to be a good time for us to bond. The timing is bad. There's also many unknowns. Where are we going? Africa? Uganda? Where? Scranton may not be the Eden of God, but certainly not Uganda. Going into the unknown. Where are you going to stay? What are you going to eat? Well, I don't think it's going to work. The costs are involved. The security, are things safe there? Especially in this day and of age, we hear so much about security in the age of terrorism. There's so many reasons why not to go, why it cannot work at this time. But I'm now preaching to the choir because many of you have gone. But maybe you have friends who are thinking like that. They seem intrigued enough, but there are all sorts of reasons why it cannot happen now. Maybe what we want to help with these friends is to give them some reasons of why they should come. And now, I have a friend who blogs profusely, almost every time. Now, of course, with the Twitter, it's just, yeah. But his blog is called If I Were to Blog. But of course, he blogs. So maybe we should write a letter for our friend, to our friend, and say, well, you know what? Perhaps if your parents are saying, well, maybe this is not right, how about you write a letter to your friend and to you why you should do it? And in the letter, give 7 points. So that I should go, well, I don't think the timing is right, I cannot come under, but if I were to go, it would be because 7 reasons. If I were to go, 1, It would be to discover what God is doing in the world. It's a simple theological truth that God is working in the world. God is at work redeeming the world. God, as St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, since the beginning has been reconciling the world to himself. That is the work of God. He is redeeming the world. Or, as he says in Isaiah, see, I'm doing a new thing. Can you see it? Isaiah 43. Friends, it's true. God is always doing a new thing in the world. God is always redeeming the world. Isaiah asks, can you see it? It would be interesting to go and see, how does this work look like of redeeming the world that God is about in far-flung places like Bwindi, Bundibujo, Nkokonjeru, names difficult to pronounce. And yet God is doing something. Dear mom, dear dad, if I were to go, I know the timing is not right, but if I were to go, I would go because of, one, I want to discover what God is doing in the world. I want to see. It's not easy to learn to see. And in order to learn to see, many times we have to be unhinged. We have to move. We have to travel. In fact, it was for this reason that in 2002, after I moved from Scranton to Duke, I started the program that I have since called the Pilgrimage of Pain and Hope. When I started, I didn't know what name to give it. People said, oh, let's call it a mission trip. I don't like the language of mission trip. It kind of gives so much weight to what we are going to do. We're going to be on mission. It's like God is not working there. We are the ones who are. I didn't like that language. I didn't like the language of experiential trip. Experiential is too casual for me. Maybe I'm too deeply theologically attuned experience. You can go from one experience to the other, kind of trotting around. No, experience is too light for me. There's something deeper than that. So anyway, for lack of time, I called the first trips that I was doing, I said, come and see. All I was doing is kind of to invite people to come and see. In the back of my mind, I say, I want people to come to see what God's work looked like in those places, how God was redeeming these places, because we might get an impression that Africa or those places are hopeless continents. So the first thing, to see what God is doing in the world. Discover what God is doing in the world. The second thing, if I were to go, dear mom, dear dad, if I were to go, it would be to discover what God is doing in my own life. The claim that God is saving the world is not just true about places. It is actually true about people. And guess what? Even about you. It sounds simple enough, but it's not easy to know, to believe, to feel that actually God is redeeming me. And I cannot imagine more dangerous people than those who want to save the world without having an experience of themselves being saved. But this for me was brought home in 2007 on one of the come and see journeys that by that time I had called Pilgrimages of Pain and Hope. We traveled with a group of graduate students from Duke to Uganda and Rwanda. But when we were in Uganda, we went to northern Uganda to Gulu. That time, Gulu was still the epicenter of the Northern Lord's Resistance Army conflict. And so it was kind of a very painful place. Went to this camp, IDP camp, internally displaced people's camp outside Gulu at Pabo, where a priest, former student of mine, was the pastor there. So I wanted to kind of to go there, see what the work he was doing, and also introduce my students to the work that was going on, but also to the challenges, the history of the conflict. So we are in this IDP camp, and as soon as we drove into the IDP camp, lots of children came and surrounded our bus. And the conditions there were, boy, it's even hard to talk about those conditions. You could see misery and suffering close at range. And so as we came out of the bus, we gathered around the kids and the priest was telling us about his work and the most difficult conditions. And then because as a leader of the group, I was on the lookout for make sure that all my students were there. I noticed Jessica was kind of standing on the side and talking to 3 kids. And so even as the priest was explaining, I kept keeping an eye to make sure that everybody was in the group. And so I spent about 45 minutes there, went back into the bus, and Jessica, at that time, was seated by herself, so I moved my seats, went to sit with her and say, how are you feeling? What are you saying? It's okay. But I could see that she didn't want to speak. So, because it was a very painful experience. And so we went back to Kampala, Bethany House, and then they left to come back to the US. And so when we were debriefing back at Duke, when we were debriefing, she gave this testimony. She said, I got saved on this pilgrimage of pain and hope. And I know where that happened. It happened in northern Uganda. It happened at Pabo, IDP camp. And so we're all very eager to see what does she mean that I got saved? He said, well, you may all remember when we arrived, the kids surrounded us and you were talking in a group and the priest there, and I was feeling that it was too much. The pain was too much, too intense. So I withdrew to the side, just kind of. And then when I withdrew to the side, 3 kids came to surround me. And so I had to start to say something to the kids. So I started telling them, what's your name? How old are you? And Jessica says, I started telling these kids that, each one of you is a child of God. Is made in God's image. Is God's beloved. Remember, I'm teaching at Duke in the Divinity school, so these are students preparing for ministry to go be pastors. So I started telling these kids how special, how precious they were. And Jessica says, that hit me so deeply. Because for the first time, I heard those words being spoken to me. Of course, I had grown up in a Christian home. I had grown up in America where constantly we were told you are special, you are beautiful, you are the best, and so forth and so forth. I said, I never believed it. I never believed it. And she was very transparent. She said, I've had issues in my life and so forth. Honestly speaking also, truth be said, Jessica was not the most beautiful of all people. But she was so transparent, saying, I have had issues and so forth, I don't know, feet and things like that. But she said, for the first time I heard those words, that you are special, you are beautiful, you are loved, in the very process of me telling these kids. Dear mom, dear dad, I can't go, but if I were to go to discover what God is doing in my own life, to discover me. And I'm sure many of you have gone, would have similar stories like this that happened in the very process of encountering those who are different, the poor, the marginalized. 3, dear mom, dear dad, I can't go, but if I were to go, it would be because I want to discover community. I want to discover a community. Jean Vanier, many of you know Jean Vanier, the story of Jean Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche community. The L'Arche community, a community where able-bodied people live with those who are not so able-bodied, challenged in many ways, mentally and otherwise. The founder, Jean Vanier, a French-Canadian who eventually settled in France, Navy officer, powerful, strong man who, after finishing his Ph.D. in philosophy, decided to take in 2 men handicapped to live with them, and since then has grown this ministry of the L'Arche community around the world, over 1,300 homes around the world that not take care, but kind of living together, those who are mentally challenged and those who are not so mentally challenged. He says something to the effect, what the disabled require of us, which can also be extended to the poor and the sick, what the disabled require of us is not so much that we do things for them, important as that might be, but that we learn to sit at the same table so that together we may realize what it means to be children of God. Not so much what we can do for them, but together that we can learn to sit at the same table. Together to realize that communion of what it means to be children of God. It's not so much what we can do at the Providence home in Nkokonjeru, important as that is, but to sit together with those kids, to realize this kind of communion is what is at stake. And then Jean Vanier says something to the effect that, you know, we all have a wound, what Jean Vanier calls the wound of loneliness. The wound of loneliness, and that kind of keeps us restless, seeking for community. Even as we do so much, so many things, there's nothing that can substitute for that wound of community. You know, I have noticed that myself. For a number of years, I was sitting on the board of this organization called Word Made Flesh. Based in Omaha, it was sending out young people throughout the world. This Word Made Flesh was an incarnational ministry that sent young people to live among the poor in the world, in Nepal, in Sierra Leone, in Bolivia. And so I was a member of the board. And one of the tasks that we had as members of the board was to interview the candidates that were going to be sent out, and then commission them, pray for them, and send them out. Not for short term, but for it was long term. They had to commit to 3 years. And so most of the students, young men, young women, were finishing college. So they had just finished college, and they had applied to come to Word Made Flesh so that they can spend 3 years of their life living intentional communities. The founder there had lived and worked with Mother Teresa of Calcutta for a number of years before Mother Teresa passed away. So that's where he got the idea. So what impressed me about that as we sat in these interviews, really very serious interviews of these young people, was how serious these young people were. And it was a surprise to me. These young people, brilliant young people, just finished college, and they wanted to go to Nepal. Their friends were going to the Silicon Valley, to New York, to work for these powerful companies, but these were going to all these places around the world. And when we told them that they had passed, they were set to go, they would call their parents, and their parents would either fly in or drive across the country to be with the young people as they celebrated their being sent off to live in these marginal, intentional communities. And we say, oh, by the way, before we go, know that you have to raise your own support. It doesn't make sense. Brilliant. All their friends are going to these high-paying jobs and so forth and so on. So what is going on in the life of these young people? I think that's the kind of wound and restlessness that Jean Vanier is speaking about. So the discovery of a community, in a way, surprisingly happens when we are able to sit down with those who are different from us and share life together in this new communion. Number 4, dear mom, dear dad, I can't go now, but if I were to go, I would love to go to experience the gospel, Godspell, Evangelium, good news. The proclamation of the good news is always connected with joy, to discover joy, delight. Dorothy Day calls it the duty of delight. The duty of delight. How to experience that something is good about life, about the world, about me being here. There's something about that deep sense of joy that many of us have not had time to feel, to experience, because we live in a very fast-paced society and life. But that sense of delight, that sense of it is good to discover that great joy. I think something in a way happens when we are able to do simple things for genuine reasons, but that means that they're not really not about us, but about something bigger than us. To discover something of that. I think that is what the gospel is about. In the way that I've been describing that, I have been using the story of Bethany, and that's why I wrote this small book, Stories from Bethany. Bethany is an interesting place in the New Testament. Bethany is just outside Jerusalem, for those of you who have traveled to the Holy Land, on the other side of the Mount of Olives. Two things are significant about this name, Bethany. One, that the very name Bethany is a compound of two Greek words, Beit Ane, house of the poor. The other thing that is significant about this house of the poor is in all the Gospels, Jesus never stayed in Jerusalem. You guessed right. He always stayed in Bethany with the friends, Martha, Mary, Lazarus, Simon the leper. So this was a very poor slum area where all the poor congregated, especially since it was just about a mile only away from Jerusalem. The poor, the lepers, especially the lepers, are unclean because they could not enter the holy city. All those who were unclean lived in Bethany, not in Jerusalem. But that is where always Jesus stayed. Even in the Last Supper, he did the Last Supper in the upper room. And then after the Last Supper, he would go down. And when you stand on the Holy Mount in Jerusalem, it's very easy to see how the story describes it. So he's going down through the Kedron Valley. You know, Jerusalem is a very small place. And then you can see the Gethsemane area, and then the Mount of Olives. And on the other side, that is Bethany. So after the Last Supper, he was actually going down. He had come down, going through the Kedron Valley, Mount of Olives, in order to go back to sleep at Bethany. That's when he was arrested. He always slept in Bethany. That is very, very significant when the gospel talks about the incarnation. He came to dwell among us. There's something about Jesus living in Bethany. But what you see going on also in Bethany is a lot of intimacy, joy, celebration. So look, Jesus goes into a village called Bethany. A woman named Martha welcomes him in her house, and Martha throws a party. And Jesus doesn't go alone, so you can imagine all the entourage and so forth. It's not surprising that Martha says, well, Mary, come help me. There's so much work here. Look at all these people that needs to be fed and so forth. Celebration. Lazarus dies, is brought back to life. There's another big party in Bethany. And that's when Mary anoints the feet of Jesus, and the whole house is filled with a new fragrance. All that happens at Bethany. The sense of joy, of intimacy, of this good to be there. There's something about this, what you're doing, in a way that communicates a sense of that it's good to connect with those places, the Bethanys, if you like, of this world. In doing so, we experience something of that delight, of that joy that is connected with the initial preaching of the good news. Dear mom, dear dad, I can't come, I can't go this time, but if I were to go, number 5, it's because I want to discover hope. To discover hope. Hope is a verb. It's because I want to be hoped. I like the African-American expression. You get hoped. This happens especially for many of us who are maybe familiar with the African-American congregation. When the preacher is preaching and so forth and things are not coming, the congregation responds and say, God, help him, God, help him, God. God has to help you. You get hoped. Hope as a verb. To want to be filled with a sense of there is something that may not be seen, but that is working on within whatever is going on, but it comes as a surprise. Especially hope in the midst of challenges. It'd be interesting to listen to Dr. Scott Berman this afternoon about his own experience, but in the midst of so many challenges, what does hope look like? I think these journeys, in a way, teach us how to know, to touch, to learn hope. In the midst of pain and suffering, hope radiates. Perhaps in the overall scheme of things, this is where Africa plays a key role in God's plan of salvation. That in the midst of so much hardship, in the midst of so much pain, there is a sense of joy, of hope. John talked about resilience. I think it speaks about hope in our own lives. Unless we learn to live at that intersection of pain and hope, then we don't know what hope is. I remember the story of Malcolm Yep. Malcolm Yep, a 14-year-old boy from Malaysia, Singapore. Friends of mine, they came on a pilgrimage of pain and hope, 2009. 14-year-old boy. We travel different places and so forth. So in the end, Malcolm says, we're kind of debriefing at the end at the Bethany house, and Malcolm says, I didn't want to come, but my mother and my dad forced me to come. But I'm happy they forced me to come. This is a 14-year-old boy now making this. I'm happy they forced me to come. He said, really, why did you want to come? He said, well, I was afraid, I didn't know where I was going and so forth. I didn't want to come to Africa. But I'm happy that I came. He said, say more, Malcolm. Why are you happy that you came? He said, well, I can't understand, but one thing that I take away is I can't understand how this has been a very beautiful trip. I've really enjoyed myself. But also I can understand how there's so much pain that we have encountered, we have seen, but so much hope, so much joy, so much, I can understand. I think we need to learn to see that. That's the way I think God works. That hope, we get hoped, if you like, in the midst of the pain, the challenges that are going on in our life. Dear mom, dear dad, I can't go. But if I were to go, number 6, it's because I feel a call to service, a question of service. Again, this is where the story of Martha and Mary Bethany are significant. Really, Martha and Mary representing two sides of the same coin. We read this story usually in a very quick and easy way when Jesus says to Martha, 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 you worry about so many things, but Mary has chosen the better part. As like dismissing Martha, exonerating Mary. I think these are two sides of the same story of Bethany. The service that is going on, at the same time, the intimacy, how to hold together both the service and the intimacy. Because it is the same Mary, actually, later on, who comes to anoint the feet of Jesus with this expensive oil. This service that is so, so extravagant, that is so generous, that is so unselfish, that is what actually fills the entire house with a new fragrance. A call to service beyond me, beyond us. I think there is something like this that God has planted and continues to plant in each one of us. And it will not rest until it finds expression in something like this. Number 7, dear mom, dear dad, I can't come, I can't go this time. But if I were to go, it's because, finally, I want to belong to a new people in the world. I want to belong to a new people. Again, here is a simple theological truth. God is creating a new people in the world, beyond east and west, beyond north and south, beyond black and white, beyond African and American. There is something of that dynamic that is going on, and the invitation to do something like that, I think, is an attempt to live into that. The theologians call that the Ephesian moment. In what? Ephesian moment. The letter to Ephesians, St. Paul celebrates that letter, beautiful letter. The dividing wall has been broken. All of us who used to be far apart have now been brought together. There's no more Greek or Jew. The dividing wall is broken, that we are all members of Christ's body, we are all members of one building, and we are like bricks helping to build one new edifice of where God lives. So Paul celebrates that. The historical context why Paul is celebrating that in the letter to the Ephesians is because at Ephesus, that was the first time that Greeks and Gentiles came together. And they came together to eat together. It sounds simple enough. Until you understand, you can do all you want, but if you are a pious Jew, you can never eat with a Gentile. Now, that is how radical this community of Ephesus was. That what brought them together, it's not just kind of praying together, but eating together. Jews and Greeks and Gentiles eating together at the same table, unheard of. And now it was there actually that a new name had to be invented for this new group of people that then later on came to be called Christians, because they didn't know what to call them. But it was in the very act of eating together that was radical. God is making a new people in the world, and he's inviting us to eat together across divides. It was just beautiful, Kathy, thank you very much for last night. To be last night around the table, Ugandans, Americans, and laughing, and same can see here. There is something of a glimpse in this eating together, something of a glimpse of the banquet of life. And that's what God is inviting us to live into already, into these kind of glimpses of the Ephesian moments. It all cannot happen unless somehow we are unhinged. Mom, Dad, I don't know how to end this letter, but honestly, I feel I don't know what God is doing, but I'm so glad to be part of it. Thank you very much. Welcome.
So I did forget to say that he's working right now on precisely this subject of to whom do I belong? If you know Sister Peggy, when she came from El Salvador to Scranton, she asked the same question. To whom do we belong? And this is Father's research question right now. And he has a year fellowship to deal with that. And I think we all have experienced that when we are in Uganda with our feet in the dirt, as he encourages us to do, that we belong there and are living people there. So please, the floor is open for questions for Father. And then what we are going to do after that is look at the questions that are on the middle of the table, address those as a group, and discuss and process what we've been working through so far today. So, but first, let's ask some questions to Father Emmanuel and continue the conversation.
Like John said in the morning, either I wasn't clear or I've exhausted everything. But I've just been interested also to see how you connect with the story of Millard Fuller and some of the reflections that we have had. Yes, Margaret.
I have a practical question. Do you think there's some ways to introduce students on campus to things that would get them interested in pursuing an actual formal program in a place like Uganda?
What are some of the practical ways that can introduce students so that they can be more actively engaged in programs like this? I can think of two immediately. I think events like this that perhaps might also involve a kind of a fair might be one way in which kind of students might be interested, and those might also include inviting alumni who have gone on this kind of experience to share their experience with the other students, to be there to answer the questions, to be able to speak, because I feel there is a lot of either a restlessness that has not been addressed, and maybe students don't even know why they are feeling restless, but I think that might be actually helped if we are articulate, or there is a certain kind of a sense of I don't want to know, because the more you know, the more you might become restless. So fairs might be one way to do that. That kind of introduce more students. But the other way on campus, especially, is development of courses, courses that kind of focus on these issues. Some of these courses might have a travel component in them, but even others that do not have a travel component, I think it's enough to kind of excite the students about the knowledge that they are learning, and then kind of maybe open up. I feel that the more that you engage this in terms of phase 2 that you are entering, I think it might call for more courses being opened up or being designed. Some of them might be co-taught by different professors from different disciplines. A number of them might invite, for example, guest speakers into them. But this is, I think, one way that might involve more students into these kind of programs. Yes, John.
Emmanuel, thank you for your speech. And thank you also for pointing out the question of going and how important it is and how wrenching it can be. Because I know many of the students who are seated here had an experience very much like, well, it's not the right time for me, or my mom and dad don't want me to go, or, and so I wonder if it's possible for us to say, I know most of you, or many of you, could be very close to writing such a letter, which you say, I wish I could go, but I didn't. But now you did, and I wondered whether some of you had any responses to the convention, the way you set this up. So what would you say to a student who was just on the edge, but was writing a letter? I can't go, but. And also, I wonder if anyone has any response to how now, particularly on the matter of parents. So when I meet with students before we go, I always say, well, there's money, and then there are parents. Really important matter. So how about how parents feel now? I wonder if there was anybody there.
Yeah, thank you. So that's addressed to all of us. This lady. Yeah. No?
Oh, I do have a question. It's somewhat unrelated. But I had Dr. Finch's class. I think it was it the Church in Africa? The class you did? And everybody read your book, Reconciling All Things. Yeah, so I really loved the book. Actually, I remember a concept from it that I've always taken it with me. Is it the idea of creating spaces for dialogue? And I was just wondering how you work with students and you bring them on travel courses to Uganda or internationally, like how that concept does that influence your dialogue with them? Because I really love that phrasing of dialogue amongst different people through creating spaces for that.
Yeah, no, I thank you very much. What's your name?
Rosemary?
Rosemary. Yeah, thank you very much about reconciling all things. It's a good book, I think. But of course, but of course, I'm biased. Yeah, the whole question of space, creating space, I find it very, very powerful. And what I have tried to do in my pilgrimages of pain and hope, I designed them specifically in such a way that all the time that the groups that come, 2 weeks, we are not only the group from here, but we are with the people from the ground, from the region. I call them local pilgrims. So if, for example, there are 12 people coming from the US, I usually have maybe about 6 local pilgrims that journey with us throughout. I kind of usually select them, pick them, depending on the composition of the group, to see what kind of rich conversation can develop. If they are students, I pick some students. If there are some from the medical profession, I pick some from the medical profession, to kind of engage conversation throughout. As you know, there's a lot of traveling on the bus. so much time. One of the things that I've realized in the end is the deep friendship that actually develop out of these between the local pilgrims and the foreign pilgrims, by kind of creating that space, and we're all moving together for the 2 weeks. So kind of finding more ways to integrate the foreign, the visitors with the local, which also gives added opportunity to learn, because there's so much knowledge that these local pilgrims add to the knowledge. Yes, towards the back there.
I'll answer part of yours and some more other things. So if you saw the baby that was kind of going around over there earlier, that was mine. So I'm a new parent, and I actually went to Uganda on the trip in '09. So I'm a little old now. I feel like it. Old, and I'm a parent. And I guess they. I know my parents tell me all the time that, you do anything for your kid, you want to protect them, you'll die for them, you'll do anything. And you don't really get that until that kid is in your arms and you're like, I'm so scared. So scared. And I just got out of the army, so my parents shouldn't have been worried about me going to Uganda, but they were. They knew that I was gonna, go to Iraq. They knew that I was gonna go to Kosovo. They knew that I was gonna go to all these places, but for some reason, Uganda was the one that was the issue. And I would say, as a new parent and now knowing what that feeling is of, of the unknown, fear of the unknown is, you can only be, I don't know how to say it, you gotta make yourself unsafe, kind of, not in danger terms, but you have to make yourself unsafe in order to open up your experiences. And obviously, when you go with people that you trust, it's always better. So you have someone to the left, someone to the right. And our trip is pretty, this was well established, so it's pretty good. But I don't know if I answered the question or if I said anything, but the biggest thing I would have to say is that you gotta tell your parents, or if you know of somebody who's thinking about going on the trip, and the parents are like, hell no. I'm sorry, I can't curse yet. I would tell them that, obviously it's one of the best experiences that you'll ever have, but at some point, being, always being safe will create instances and experiences where when you are, when you're in a situation, because you've been so inward, you can't look out. That didn't make any sense.
No, it does make a lot of sense. It does
And
a lot of sense.
it actually helped out because when I was in Iraq, our gate guards were Ugandan soldiers. And they were an interesting group, very interesting group. And we had a lot of, not problems with them, but it was hard for us to communicate a lot of times. They were a little more wild, wild west than us. And we'd have to go down there and be like, you can't do that, can't do that. And finally, I was just like, has anybody ever just tried talking to him? And so I was a lieutenant at the time, and they sent me over there, and I said, hey, I've been here, where are you guys from? It just opened up all of this communication that was just stopped, because all we were doing is arguing past each other, saying no, you can't shoot at that, or no, you can't blow that up, So, but it was really interesting that, once we started talking about that, they were able to better listen, and we were better able to listen, that, they were doing these things because that was their experience, and that, so.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
To continue the answer about convincing parents, I went on the 06 trip, and university, when you send your kid to university, right, it's about formative experiences, right? Sometimes it's a class, sometimes it's a major, sometimes it's a professor, right? And as far as creating formative experiences that are going to help your child become who they are, this trip is kind of a no-brainer, right? Anybody who went on the trip, I'm sure would agree that you come back with a wildly different perspective that you can't get from YouTube videos or textbooks, right, or lectures. So if the purpose of college, right, is to figure out who you are, this trip is kind of a slam dunk. So that's what I would say if you're trying to convince a parent.
Right, thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is John Strubeck, and I was on the 06 trip as well. And in framing the way you did your talk today about how parents feel and how students would respond, Dr. Pinches knows this well, that my parents were very much against me going on the trip. But I think if I look back, I was one of those kids that was on the plan, things were falling into place, but I really didn't have a sense of what community meant. I was interested in the philosophical questions and in the theological questions, but nothing was connecting. Dr. Pinches started helping me connect those things by taking some of his courses. And I would say that as a soon-to-be parent in the next month and a half or so, we're expecting our first, what I would hope for my children is to give them the encouragement that I wasn't getting at that time, that I found in my professors and friends, that to really make it in this world, one has to leave college with a sense of community. Otherwise, you'll never really know how to build up your own community and then connect with others. And I attribute to what my wife and I are doing in our local community here in northeastern Pennsylvania, a direct result of going on this trip and my formation at the University of Scranton. So I really appreciate the way you framed all of that. It really resonated.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Can I just say that I do think one other thing that's part of that question is, well, soon enough people are going to become parents, some who went early on the trip. And so we have to ask as parents, what does it mean to us to be able to give our children the possibility of discovering what God is doing in the world? And I hope you all carry that with you in your kids.
Yes.
Well, I was going to just add to the parent conversation, I suppose. It took me a while to realize this. So after I graduated, I did JVC, and my parents had a similar reaction to me choosing JVC as to Uganda. And it wasn't like, it was like a nervous confusion, I would say. My mom was much more nervous about Uganda than JVC, but still nervous. And it took me a while, probably till after I was done with JVC, to see that both their willingness to allow me to go on to participate in my experience, but also their fear were acts of love. And that was just as important as my desire to go. And to be able to share in that was really important. And when I came back from Uganda, I went to my mom's classroom and brought, pictures and talked about my experience with little, elementary school kids. And I think that because I was able to, bring that back and continue that community, it made the dialogue different before. It made the dialogue about going or not going different. I don't know if that's just my insight on it.
Great, thank you very much. I know that's yes.
My perspective is a little bit different. I've been trying to organize a service trip for the high school, so I've just recently come to the university about a year ago, but I've been trying to organize service trips, and one thing that I find that kind of works with parents is really talking with the younger age, so I think it's really interesting that even at your age, it's the same questions, it's the same concerns from the parents. So one thing that I like to say to parents is that you can take your child to the Dominican or Belize or Africa or wherever and on a vacation and you can see it, but that I guarantee to them when their kids came back and actually lived it and experienced and got the feet of the dirt, that it would just mean all the difference in the world. Just the seeing versus the doing is the incredible thing that the service is really all about.
Great, thank you. I don't think anything to add. Anyway, but I thought now it is clear why I thought the video and the story of Melody Fuller is interesting and kind of connects with this in a way that the issue of surprise, the issue of being unhinged, the issue of a planned life can only be endured. That we all have these plans for our lives, but God has something better, might have something better actually for us, or at least for his purposes in the world. And also the whole question of antenna, kind of putting on a new antenna so that we may pick up the messages of what God is doing in the world. I thank you very much for this time and for all you are doing. God bless you. Thank you.